Starting tomorrow, there could be a lot of new options for the Philadelphia Eagles to explore in free agency with potential post-June 1st cuts coming up. We'll get into those options right here on this Locked On Eagles Friday edition of the podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Eagles fans? I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by Gino Camilleri. We're the hosts of the Locked On Eagles podcast. You can also find our work over at Bleacher Report on today's edition of Locked On Eagles. We're going to get into some potential options as the NFL circles get ready to maybe make some moves on their roster with post-June 1st cut designations coming up on Saturday. Plus, we get into the maturity and the leadership potentially budding through the Georgia Bulldog former stars that are on this Eagles defense. And First Thought wraps up with couple guys on the defensive side of the football we'll get into. So we thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Today is the last show of May, which is crazy to say. We're already entering June, and soon before you know it, Eagles training camp will be coming up. But, Gino, it's still Howie season, and there's a lot of options. We discussed this a couple weeks ago when Devontae Parker announced his retirement, that there's still some free agent options at receiver that we could like. I think there could be some even bigger names that pop up, not just at receiver, but at other positions, as tomorrow is June 1st. And I think you'll see a lot of potential cut candidates from teams that are bigger names and maybe even some trades. I think you could see some movement coming in the NFL over the next couple days.
So I don't know why they picked this arbitrary date of June 1st, but whatever it is, it basically goes into this second phase of contracts. So the first phase is once the new league year starts as free agents, and that goes until June 1st. And there's two differentiating factors with the pre and post June 1st cut designations. The big one is the ability to save a large amount of money on the cap, as opposed to paying and cutting the guy pre-June 1st. A lot of things come into play when bonuses are paid. Are they going to be there for workouts? A lot of that money gets paid out, and then June 1st comes, and these dead cap hits, they're a little bit more affordable. And I think the big elephant in the room that we've kind of talked about over the last few weeks or so is James Bradberry.
Of course.
Is he going to be on this team come June 2nd? I truly don't know.
I really don't think he's going to be. Maybe he is June 2nd, but I think this team could be exploring potential trade options, right? You look at a team like the Arizona Cardinals or the Buffalo Bills, maybe even the Indianapolis Colts. I'm trying to think of teams that have coaches that know Bradberry, that have had success with him in the past, like a Jonathan Gannon or a Shane Steichen or a Sean McDermott. I could totally see something happening, Gino. And although I did look into it, James Bradberry, and I saw in some comments too, so I want to confirm this, Bradberry was not at practice yesterday, supposedly because of a charity event that he's running. However, he wasn't at voluntary OTAs last week either. So
you didn't know when voluntary OTAs were going to be?
I was going to
say,
that's what I thought too. I felt bad at first. I'm like, damn, he had a charity event. But I'm like, but hold on. Why are you scheduling an event during voluntary OTAs? So he hasn't been at practice, and something could be coming. The Eagles could add some players, but that's the elephant in the room. That's the first shoe to drop is number 24.
So if you were to have cut James Bradberry prior to June 1st, it's going to cost you around $15.1 million on the 2024 cap. If he were to be cut post June 1st, which I think we have talked about over the last few months, I think we even mentioned that they might release him when the new league year started and then designate him as a post June 1st cut. But if they were to cut him, designate him as a June 1 guy, and you're only allowed 2 designations of the June 1st, and I don't think they designated any players as June 1 guys this year, he would only account for $4.3 million against the 2024 cap. A lot more stomachable. And they do have a decent amount of cap. They still have around $27 million to roll over into next year. You take that number down to 23 with that dead cap that
you're still over 20. I'd do it.
That's right where Howie likes to be. When he rolls over numbers, it's anywhere from like 14 to 22 is his comfort area over the last couple of years. I think he's playing with house money right now that he's still on the team. And if you were to cut him, you're still going to have close to $23 million in cap space to do whatever you want. Roll it over to next year, maybe even extend some guys, potentially sign some June 1st guys elsewhere. I was just reading an article before we had started, I believe, from PFF. Guys like Cortland Sutton, Miles Sanders. Like, would you bring Booby back at a discounted price if he were to get cut?
That, actually.
I think he's like a perfect complement to Saquon Barkley. And
when you look at it, Carolina drafted Jonathan Brooks. They actually signed Rashad Penny, funny enough, Chuba Hubbard, who actually beat out Miles Sanders halfway through the year for the starting job in Carolina. There's 3 guys potentially ahead of Miles. And yeah, it would be awkward. I don't know if he'd want to come back to be Saquon Barkley's backup like he was at Penn State for a year, going back to a place that didn't want to pay him where he was an RB1 coming off a career season in 2022. But for the Eagles, Gino, absolutely Miles Sanders would be a perfect change of pace behind Saquon Barkley. I think Sanders thinks he's good enough to have a much bigger role across the NFL. So I think it would be one-sided interest. But from an Eagles perspective, absolutely. And then Kenneth Gainwell doesn't have to play, and that's music to my ears.
And the article, I don't want to misquote it. It was from Tony Catalina over at PFN, and there were some other great names that even you had mentioned yesterday. And
I was going to say, I've been thinking a lot about some receivers, Gino.
Tyler Lockett, man. You mentioned that. I'm like, is that even a possibility? And then I start looking at the financials. I'm like, oh, he really can be a post-June 1. And you talk about the element of what he could bring to this football team.
He's perfect for what they need.
And how he's always looking for these type of deals. And maybe it's not even like a sign a guy after you cut James Bradberry that was also cut. Maybe it's like a player swap that they look to do potentially.
Maybe.
I mean, hey, we got James Bradberry. Do you guys need a cornerback? Let's find a guy who you might potentially go and cut.
Exactly.
Let's swap it. Let's just get these 2 bad contract situations off of each other's books. We can both help each other. That's wishful thinking, but for James Bradberry, it might be wishful thinking to go somewhere else because he's probably not going to have a job here in a couple days.
Would the Indianapolis Colts say, we'll take James Bradberry and, hey, we drafted A.D. Mitchell in the 1st or 2nd round. We've got 2 other receivers we really like in Pittman and Downs. Hey, here's Alec Pierce, right? Like, that's another idea.
You had mentioned him a couple weeks ago.
I mentioned him a few weeks ago. Tyler Lockett's the name I thought because he just would be such a perfect complement to Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. Plus, you look at the Seattle Seahawks. They have JSN, who they want to have a bigger role, very similar style of play to Lockett. They've got DK Metcalf. Maybe the Lockett move is more of a deadline kind of situation where Seattle's a few games under 500. Geno Smith didn't pan out. Same with Sam Howell. And then they're looking to offload that contract. Maybe it's more of a deadline kind of topic. But you look at those 2 players, Geno, and even a guy that I tweeted out this morning, like, how about Robert Woods, who the Eagles had interest back in 2022, the offseason. They had interest in bringing him in over from LA. He's a guy that right now is buried on the Houston depth chart behind Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, John Mechie. They re-signed Noah Brown. Like, he's wide receiver 6 there. I could see them bringing in a veteran like Robert Woods too. There's so many options at receiver.
The good part about the June 1 for teams that are signing players that are cut, any amount of prorated money accelerates and they are paid that prior to June 1st.
Right.
And then after that, any money is accelerated to the following year. If you're already paid your guaranteed money, would you take a lesser deal if you're a guy like Cortland Sutton for like a year? Come to Philadelphia for a year. Everybody that has come to Philly at a skill position has gone on to get a pretty decent contract elsewhere. I'm not saying that's a position in need, but potentially a boundary corner is like your 3rd guy. You have to look at every option moving over these next couple of days, because this is a time that it's Howie season, man. Like, this is what he does. These are the times when the market inefficiencies begin. Also, he created some for himself that he has to get out of, but he's done that. And time and time again, he's got out of worse situations. The Kiko and Byron Maxwell contracts that he was able to get out of. I think he could get out of $4.3 million that James Bradberry had.
It is funny, Gino, that the one big time mistake that he's trying to get out of is a move that old Howie Roseman would have made, right? Where he extended a player that's probably you're paying him for what he did rather than what he's going to do in Bradberry. Exactly. And it yet again kind of bit him in the back for sure. So that's the move he's trying to get out of, but there's some things he could walk into as well. People did not like on Twitter that I mentioned two players that hurt the Eagles in their Super Bowl 57 loss. Juju Smith-Schuster could get released from New England. Kadarius Toney from the Chiefs. Don't love those options, but there's a lot of names at receiver to keep an eye out for. Running back, like you said, with Miles Sanders. Who knows what potential trades or signings could come from Howie Roseman after tomorrow with that post-June 1st designation about to hit. Coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, we're going to get into some players that are already on the roster that are very important to the 2024 success. The Georgia Bulldog defensive players, they're showing a lot of leadership. They're hoping to break out this year. What's our confidence level in those guys? We'll get into it coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we're brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle to level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, got to turn down the volume because of all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Gino, I was listening to the press conferences over the last few weeks, and you hear guys like Jordan Davis talk. It's a big year for Davis to try to take that next step, and same with Jalen Carter, same with Nolan Smith. You can even throw Nakobe Dean into this conversation. And I was thinking again about those Georgia Bulldogs, and man, they are so crucial to what the Eagles are going to do this year, not just from a defensive standpoint, because Fletcher Cox is gone. So it's up to Jalen Carter more, and it's up to Jordan Davis. But Nakobe Dean, like, it's another year where TJ Edwards is not here, and the Eagles kind of went bargain hunting at linebacker, and Hassan Reddick's gone, which means for Nolan Smith, like, the role is going to be much bigger this year. Those guys are so instrumental on the field, but there's so much leadership opportunity now for them to really take over this locker room. It was great to hear just the mature responses from all of them during their press conferences. Like, I really think these guys get it. And you can tell they came from a world-class college program. Like, even if they don't become stars, these guys are going to have a prominent voice in the locker room, and they're going to be really solid players for you.
And I think the best part about these guys is that Nolan Smith, for example, he was really honest with the media, saying that he had that learning curve.
Same with Jordan Davis.
Jordan Davis says he cuts out the Arizona iced teas and he's down a couple pounds.
Yeah, he said he cuts out the juice.
Cut out the juice. And I get it, man. Those sweet teas, those Arizona, the only thing beating inflation, still at 99 cents. Sure. But then you go to Jalen Carter, and I think not signing another veteran to kind of take that role puts a lot in their lap in a very good way. And seeing Jordan Davis come to camp a little slimmed down, and seeing Nolan come absolutely ripped up to camp, man. Like, he put on, I believe he was 238. He said he's around 245 right now. Yep. That's a weight where you could truly have him play at the edge and be that hybrid, potentially could play off ball for you. He's going to take on a big role, because the thing that they need to replace, the Ferrari that they need to replace in Hassan Reddick, it's not an easy task.
No.
Because what Hassan did, you just look at the numbers. Yeah, they were great, but at what times? He came up huge in the fourth quarter. When did Fletcher Cox come up big? Oh, all the time, because he was always on the football field. You're absolutely right, Lou. So much sits in the lap of these young Georgia Bulldogs. But part of the evaluation process and part of the reason they felt comfortable making those selections at that time was knowing that this torch was going to have to be passed within the next couple of years, right, Lou? Because if you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, we're not going to have any veteran defensive tackles, our cornerback group where Keely Ringo is going to be much younger moving forward with Darius Slay and James Bradberry potentially moving out. The edge group, what is it moving forward beyond Bryce Huff? You still have to go and sign Josh Sweat to an extension.
Exactly.
It's all there for the taking. And they have to go and grasp it.
They showed their confidence in these Georgia players by their moves, Gino, because as you mentioned,
they won 2 straight national championships, man. They stepped up in the biggest way.
Yeah.
You make those selections. You make the simple picks of taking guys from big schools who played in big-time football games in the biggest conference at one of the biggest programs because they understand expectations. What do we always say on this show, Lou? When they get to the year of expectations, that's when you really start to see who can overcome that adversity. And that's what these Georgia Bulldogs, hopefully deep down, have been instilled since they were playing down in Athens years ago.
And it's not like they haven't shown anything on the field that it's not them just saying, well, we drafted JJ Arthega-Whiteside in the second round, therefore he's getting a starting job and we're not going to bring in somebody else.
Also didn't play in the SEC championship.
So Jordan Davis, although he hasn't shown the elite ceiling of Jalen Carter at the NFL level, he's shown enough where it's worth believing in him. Same with Nolan Smith. He flashed in that playoff game, and Nakobe Dean at times has flashed, and so has Keely Ringo. Like, they've done enough on top of the investment you made in them to believe they're going to pan out. And they say all the right things. And even you talk about like Vic Fangio, it's always back and forth about how players felt about him as a coach, but it's great to hear Jalen Carter say, I want to get coached up the old fashioned way. Like, I love being pushed. Jordan Davis, like, there's no BS with this guy. A lot of times coming into the NFL, the modern day athlete, they roll their eyes at a coach like Vic Fangio. It's cool to hear these young players that have a pretty great resume already are embracing that coaching.
Yeah, you don't play at Georgia and win and not get it. Like, the idea of getting it.
Yes, it just feels like just like Devontae Smith from Alabama and Landon Dickerson and A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts. Like, there's just more guys that just, it feels like they get it. So if I'm going to put my money, if I'm going to bank on somebody to, overcome some of the struggles early on in their career and meet their potential, like, I'm going to bank on these kind of players. So it might not pan out. Jordan Davis might just be a 2-down, 1-tech nose tackle. Nolan Smith might just be a third rotational edge. Maybe that's the scenario that plays out, but I think it's worth banking on more from them.
The ceiling is so high for these guys, but at the same time, if you want to shoot for the stars, you could come crashing down and burn at the same exact time.
But you got to do that, right? I mean, you can't, or else you might as well just make Band-Aid moves every single offseason.
Exactly.
You got to go for it.
And you have to like that these guys are walking the walk, talking the talk. Now, can you go and do it on the football?
Even Nolan Smith's talking about playing, like, he's like, well, I'll do whatever the team asks me again. He was asked a question about playing more stand-up linebacker. And most guys could be like, even Hassan Reddick to a degree is like, I just want to rush the quarterback, as he should. But Nolan Smith, you hear him talk, he's like, I'll do anything. If they want me to play the mic, I'll play the mic. I mean, that's the kind of guys, they're just wired the right way.
One thing in scouting that you just can never find out unless you're talking to these guys is like, do they truly love it? Like, the idea of loving the process. It's like, dude, do you want to go to OTAs in the middle of June when it's weltering hot out and go through this process over and over
with
and over
again? With a Vic Fangio just kicking your ass every
exactly.
day.
Like, calling you out on your nonsense.
And I'd understand
a
why
guy like
would
Jeff
want
Stoutland
that.
just mother effing you till the cows come home. Like, I get it, man. Like, it's a tough business, and that's the reason why only 1% of 1% ever gets there. But at the same time, expectation for those Georgia Bulldogs, they have to step up to the expectation. Have they lived up to it before? Man, they did it on a big stage years ago. But now you're in the NFC East on a team that has aspirations to compete right now and compete at the highest level. So it's not just, get your wheels under you and get ready to go for a run in the next couple of years. It's, can you step up to the plate?
Yeah, that was the last few years.
Fletcher Cox and TJ Edwards, who won you a Super Bowl, and guys like Hassan Reddick. Can you step up to the plate? Georgia Bulldogs, now is your time. You got the Barker bite in you.
Right, because every move they made, you could say, no one really that they signed or traded for or drafted, you could say, oh, there goes the spot for Nakobe Dean. Like, there goes Nolan Smith's starting job, right? Yeah. As you mentioned, Gino, you could say Bryce Huff was the biggest move they made at one of these guys' positions. But as you also alluded to, Josh Sweat has 1 year in his contract. Could he have a big year and they extend him? Sure. But we know Brandon Graham's going to be gone. Mm-hmm. So a top 2, top 3 spot is all but guaranteed for Nolan Smith if he takes that step. And, Keely Ringo, sure, there's a lot of corners there, but they drafted Cooper DeJean, I think, with the mindset of moving him across the formation. Like, that second job when Darius Slay's gone in 2025, they probably want Keely Ringo to win that job. Yeah. Sure, Devin White could be your every down linebacker, but they didn't go out there and pay Patrick Queen a huge contract or Frankie
It's big on Howie. It's a big evolution of where he is.
Because he normally does not do this. He normally has a plan B or a veteran just in case his top pick. Not saying he never gives his top pick a chance, but he normally has a couple options.
Yeah, he was bowling with bumpers on for the longest time. Like, that's what 2018 felt like in 2019. Yep. And you just won't let these young guys play. And it's like, you drafted them to do what then? You drafted them to just be on the team, and
which was always a pet peeve of mine. Yeah.
And now you drafted these guys high. They weren't. I mean, Keely Ringo was the lowest investment out of all of them.
But you gave up the third round, but you gave up a future third for him.
Yeah. I mean, you drafted all of them within essentially the top 100, 3 of them within the top 75, basically. Yeah. So they all got to go out there and kill it.
I've got my question marks about almost all of them except for Jalen Carter. But regardless of that fact, they're still worth this chance.
Here, question for you real quick before we change the subject.
Yeah.
If Jalen Carter is the only one of those guys to work out, but he is a Hall of Famer, he's a gold jacket player, but the rest of the 3 guys are just one contract players. Is that a win for you?
I still think it was worth the strategy. Gino, if all of them didn't pan out, trying to recreate the greatest college defense of all time that won back-to-back national titles onto your defense when they're all top picks, it was worth the idea. Even if the execution's not there. And, I don't think any of these players, even if Jordan Davis doesn't get 81 pressures in his first 3 years as a nose tackle like Dexter Lawrence or whatever that crazy stat was I saw from PFF, even if Nakobe Dean doesn't become a top 10 Mike linebacker, Keely Ringo's not a top CB1, I think their floor is very high no matter what. Like, none of these guys are going to be complete busts. They already have shown they can at least be pretty solid role players for you.
And that's a bigger win than a lot of Howie Roseman draft classes, right? Like you mentioned, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, he couldn't even be a role player.
Couldn't even play. He couldn't even be on the football field. These guys all belong at least on the field to a certain extent.
Right, but if in a couple years it's like, okay, Nakobe's a good number 2, like he could be a great number 2, but we got to draft another guy, and like Jordan Davis is that like Snacks Harrison type of can defend the run till the cows come home.
It's not black and white.
Another interior.
The pick could still have been wrong, Gino, but that doesn't mean the player is a bad player. It's like now I've said this, but I've made this comparison before. It's like Nelson Aguilar. You intended to draft Aguilar with the idea of him being wide receiver 1 to replace Macklin and Djax. He is a bust in that way, but he was not a bad player for you for a couple years.
That's fair.
So he's had a solid NFL career. That's what I think could pan out with these players, but I think they have a much higher ceiling than that. So can't wait to see these Georgia Bulldogs continue to develop and take over. It's their time in 2024. The torch has been officially passed to the Bulldogs. All right, coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles, our last edition of First Thought, and we'll start with some defensive players. We'll finish some things off with some secondary players. That's coming your way right here on Locked On Eagles. All right, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, taking a trip down memory lane, our final segment of First Thought, where we bring up a random Eagle from the 2000s and just give you our first initial thought from that player. We've thrown out the likes of Byron Maxwell and Sam Bradford, Jay Ajayi, Jason Avant. The list goes on and on. Ronald Darby. It's been a fun series for a few weeks. Gino, we're going to finish things off with some slot cornerbacks. Give me your first thought when it comes to like the OG slot god, at least through our childhood, I'd say, Joselio Hanson.
Joselio was my guy, man.
This was your guy.
This was a time where he came into Philadelphia in 2006 after like the real studs of that defense started to leave. But at the same time, you still had Sheldon Brown there. You still had guys like Lito. I mean, Troy Vincent had moved on at that point, but you were still developing this really good secondary. And he played all the way through 2011 with the Philadelphia Eagles. And we were making mention of DRC on the show yesterday, part of that really good unit with Asante DRC was Joselio Hanson in the slot. Lou, this guy was around the ball so often. In 2006, his first year in Philadelphia, he had 13 passes defended. 13 passes defended from a slot corner.
And back then, when slot receivers weren't what they are now, like stars weren't playing inside as much.
No, and they were not getting the amount of target share, man. No. He was a guy who was always around the football. He was a very good tackler. I mean, he had in his last year in Oakland, he had 61 tackles. I mean, he was a guy who could do everything for you. And he played in Philadelphia for way longer than you would have expected, from basically the end of the beginning of the end for Andy Reid, essentially. And I really loved him, man. I mean, he had a bunch of seasons in the 2008 to 2010 where he really stepped up, and that NFC Championship run, he really got things going for him. He was always playing. He was always on the football field and was the true OG slot god, like you had said, man. Like one of those
he gets lost in the weeds, Gino, because they had so many good. That's the one thing that's funny about the Eagles. They had such a bad outside corner history for like a decade, but they always had a really good slot corner. Like,
yeah, nickel, they're really good.
They had Joselio Hanson, and then they went to Brandon Boykin, and then they went to the next guy I'm going to bring up.
Yeah, Boykin was his replacement, essentially.
Yes, he was. And Brandon Boykin was amazing when they had two terrible starting outside cornerbacks. I think that's kind of why Joselio gets almost forgotten, too, is they've had so much success with slot corners. Boykin, I'm going to mention this guy in a second, but you also can mention Avonte Maddox, Cravon LeBlanc even. They've had a lot of success in the slot. And
even
you look at
Roby Coleman wasn't half bad that year.
He was okay. And then there's this guy who maybe is the most forgotten good player from that Eagles Super Bowl defense, P-Rob. I mean, Patrick Robinson is one of the greatest plays in franchise history, the pick six.
Loudest the Lynx ever been.
Maybe the loudest the Lynx ever been in the NFC title, his pick six on Case Keenum, which turned the game around. Remember, Minnesota was up 7-0 at that point, and they got the ball back. Just an unbelievable.
Was it Derek Barnett?
It was Chris Long. It was
Chris Long got to the point of attack, and
P-Rob is the most forgotten player, I think, on that defense, with how, at least from like how good he was incredible just for a year, and then he was gone.
He was the guy that he played for New Orleans, came to Philadelphia, was trying to resurrect his career, ended up resurrecting his career, and we wanted to resign him, but he goes down to New Orleans and he just kind of was a flash in the pan. But that year for Philadelphia made him all of his money, and he was so good when you had Ronald Darby and Jalen Mills as your primary guys.
Just another year where your slot corner was kind of carrying you.
Patrick Robertson literally carried you to a Super Bowl. That play, not only was it the loudest Lincoln Financial Field has ever been, Lou, that might be the best open field play I've seen out of a defensive back in quite some time.
Got to give Ronald Darby some credit for that play, too.
That block
where on the line. He got blown up by
Jeremy Maclin blocked himself into oblivion.
Yeah,
Jason Avant on the Deshaun play.
Yes, that's why I love it, because it reminds me of the Avant block. It's not even a block. I would just call it a charge. Like, he took the charge for Patrick Robinson.
Kind of just got in the way and allowed him to just saunter into the end zone. But literally the loudest I've ever heard Lincoln Financial.
I think so,
like
too.
My TV speakers were blowing out at that point. It was insane.
And the funny part is that felt like a throwaway signing, because at that point they had Jalen Mills. They traded for Darby already, I think. Or Darby might have been after, but regardless, Darby eventually was there. And then you spent a 2 and a 3 on Rasul Douglas and Sidney Jones. It was like, where is Patrick Robinson's spot? And then he becomes the best corner of that entire year.
Dude,
so
he was so good, man. And in terms of his career, he played essentially his entire career in New Orleans. At 28, he went to San Diego, then he went to Indy, and then he came to Philly, and he had career highs essentially in Philadelphia, 4 interceptions.
How he just did not miss
tied career high in passes defended with 18. He was everything you were looking for to add to that defense, where you were just faltering at cornerback for so long. And who was the guy in the slot before him, Luke? Do you recall?
Was it Ron Brooks?
They tried Ron Brooks.
They tried it at least in 2016, which was...
That's exactly what they did.
Yeah, which is brutal. So Oh, God, I don't even want to think.
Greatest press conference of all time.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ron Brooks.
That was great. Patrick Robinson should never be forgotten, but I feel like him and Joselio Hanson definitely are forgotten a little bit in Eagles lore. They've got some good slot corners, I think, heading into 2024 as well. So that's a position the Eagles have had a lot of success at. That's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in each and every day. Again, Monday through Friday. We will be back next week as well. Thanks again for making us your first listen every single day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off as always. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.